As Common Core put students to the test in the classrooms earlier this year, Louisiana state lawmakers were put to the test as well. Republican Representative Brett Guyman led the anti-Common Core charge, but during the 2015 legislative session, both opponents and supporters of the academic standards reached an unexpected compromise.
I'm glad that we're putting down the sword. Transparency, public involvement, a democratic process, and Louisiana standards that we can all embrace, and that's what we all wanted.
So at the end of the day, we can have something we're proud of, high Louisiana standards that prepare our children to compete across the state, across the nation, and around the globe.
Common Core was adopted by Louisiana's top school board in 2010. 2015 is the first time students were tested under the new standards.
As somebody said, the name Common Core became toxic. It did. It did for the wrong reasons. So we're hoping that by having this structure that we set up in this compromise, which by the way was fully supported by the folks that were against us, they were very good working partners in crafting this compromise, that we are in a position now to diffuse a lot of the misunderstandings about what these standards are, and we can keep going down the road towards success for our kids.
Under the Great Compromise, Louisiana's top school board will review the standards and potentially develop new ones for English and math. In 2016, public meetings will begin statewide. If new standards are not approved, Common Core stays in place. As Nina Feldman of WWNO in New Orleans reports, the Louisiana Department of Education relied on higher education, such as the Kane Center at Louisiana State University, to set the standards. The University of New Orleans houses the Educational Leadership Program. Brian Bebout, who studies educational changes, says the biggest challenge in implementing Common Core and the PARCC assessments is that they've been done in an environment where there's very little room for teachers to make mistakes. Bebout says that the PARCC exam is just another test to add to the mix in what's already a high-stakes climate.
If I were to take my son out, put him on a bike for the first time, and say, if you don't make it to the end of the block without falling off, you don't get dinner tonight, that's probably not going to be a very successful outing. But in essence, that's the situation we've put our teachers in.
Student performance on standardized testing can determine a teacher's and school's future. The potential danger, according to Bebout, is that by asking teachers to prioritize Common Core, they may end up only focusing on English and math, the two areas that the PARCC exam assesses. He says that narrowing of curriculum actually does a disservice to students because that's not what makes someone college ready. Moving on to Mississippi, where many parents complain that Common Core teaches to the lowest common denominator, deals with inappropriate subjects, and promotes data mining. Since 2010, lawmakers there have introduced dozens of bills to repeal the standards, but their efforts have failed. This year, lawmakers took a different approach. Senate Bill 2161 would have created a task force to review the standards and make recommendations on how to make them appropriate for Mississippi schools. Republican Gray Tollison of Oxford helped usher the measure through the legislature. His argument?
Let's let educators who are experts in standards and not legislators who are not expert in standards make these decisions.
The measure was vetoed by Mississippi's Republican governor because it did not go far enough to remove Common Core from the state's public schools. Education officials are, however, moving forward with a review of the state's standards. Instead of a task force, the state is looking to average Mississippians for help. The review is part of an effort to garner support for the standards while at the same time educating individuals on what is actually in them. State officials have also taken the rebranding approach. Common Core is now named Mississippi's College and Career Readiness Standards. Rebranding and public comment periods have been common in the South. Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, and Tennessee have all taken the same approach. In Alabama, State School Superintendent Dr. Tommy Bice thinks it's more than just the federal involvement that stirs opposition to Common Core.
I think there's this fear the federal government under the current president has a mission to do something sinister through education to change the minds and values of children and their families across the South.
Debbie Volz, Dean of Education at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, says it's about perceptions and fear of setting a baseline of expectations.
I think there's a fear among some that this could be a national takeover of the schools. People have a concern with the possible or what is perceived to be the loss of autonomy or local control.
While the Common Core grew out of a bipartisan effort, even some leaders involved in its creation are encouraged by the debates it has generated. The National Council of Chief State School Officers helped organize the standards. Chris Minnick, the executive director, says
Common Core standards just say what kids need to learn, not how they're taught it. Some of the legislative battles have been very hard. They've actually been very good to make sure we're having the right conversations.
Conversations that will no doubt continue state by state.